Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Cognilytica webinar with special guests, Modzy. We are thrilled to have you here on the webinar today.
Yeah, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. On today's webinar, we will cover a lot of ground, including discussing what MLOps is, why it's important to be discussing now if your company or your agency is building or consuming machine learning models, and some of the challenges with ensuring that AI models remain relevant. We'll also discuss why it's a good idea to begin establishing AI governance protocols within your organization. We have with us today Josh Elliot, who is the head of operations at Modzy. He will share how the solution, like Modzy, can help with issues around speed, scale, security, and the growing emergence of shadow AI. He'll then also provide a demo so that you guys can see Modzy in action and give you a hands-on view of how this technology works.
So we're thrilled to have you participate in another virtual event. I'm sure you've all had your fantastic experience with virtual events of all sorts. We are now in the future of the online world. So just going to familiarize yourself a little bit with the platform we're using if you're not familiar with the Demo platform, and also tell you a little bit about some housekeeping that we have for you today. So first, we have a little poll that's up. So if you're having any technical difficulties or challenges, please do indicate that. You can also message us if you're having any technical challenges. Some people are reporting some challenges with either audio or video. We encourage you to try Chrome or Firefox if you're having challenges with another browser such as Safari or MS Edge, which we do have heard reports of challenges. But in any case, please do message us. We do want you to have a fantastic experience. This is meant to be an interactive webinar. This event is for you. We obviously can be talking to ourselves all day. And of course, Kathleen and I do also run the AI Today podcast where we do talk to ourselves. But this is an interactive webinar. So we want your questions and feedback. And we have set aside some time for you during this event for your questions. After all, this webinar is for you. So as attendees on this webinar, you won't have the ability to ask your questions live with a mic or camera. We're going to spare everybody the inevitable chaos when that happens. But you can enter your questions into the chat window. And you can enter them as you're hearing them. So, and after both presentations and the demo, we will have about 15 minutes or so for questions. So please enter your questions as you have them, and we will be queuing them up and picking them up during the Q&A section of the webinar. So you don't have to wait till the end to ask your questions, but we will be waiting till the end to answer them. For those of you that are interested, the webinar replay will be available for everyone to view. And also the slides, I'm going to be posting them shortly. The slides will basically be available as handouts on the handout tab as well. So copies of the slides will be available for download and will be made available on the Cognilytica replay site. So now let's move into the webinar presentation. We have some great content for you as well as our guests.
So just a little bit about Cognilytica in case you guys are not familiar with us. Cognilytica is an AI-focused analyst and advisory firm. We produce market research, advisory, and guidance around machine learning, artificial intelligence, and cognitive technologies. As Ron mentioned, we also run the very popular AI Today podcast, where we interview various guests on how they are implementing AI. And so we actually interviewed Seth Clark from the Modzy team, and we encourage you to check out that podcast. We'll also talk about various topics in artificial intelligence and also go over various use cases in many different industries. Ron and I are also contributing writers to a number of publications. So we regularly write for Forbes, Tech Target, CTO Vision, and Cognitive World as well. If you have not read any of those pieces, we encourage you to check that out. Just like with the podcast, we'll go over how AI is being applied in various industries and dig deeper into certain topics.
So we are here to talk on the topic of MLOps. And MLOps, as you know, or maybe you don't know, this is part of the reason why you're here attending this webinar, is all about the shift towards managing models in production, in operation. That's the operations part. And part of this, the reason why we are so focused on this area of model management and model operations is that we're slowly shifting from people building AI and managing AI entirely in-house with their own team. Maybe you've had an AI effort for one particular project, or as Kathleen and I like to talk about, the various patterns of AI. But now increasingly there are others that are consuming those models or using third-party models, or perhaps even dealing with iteration and versioning of those models now that those models have been out for a while. So there's really two ways to look at this idea of MLOps. Now, we've had the concept of DevOps has been around for many, many years. DevOps as a concept has been around for well over a decade, and it stretches even beyond that. And it's the idea of managing the various development assets and technologies that we have, and keeping track of their life cycles, dealing with versioning and deployment and management. And so many folks like to think about these machine learning models as an asset, and we can certainly think of it that way, and managing the life cycle of that. So when you think of the dev part, we think about the development life cycle, the deployment, the versioning, and the IT operations components of MLOps. But that's actually not sufficient, because machine learning models are different from traditional applications because they're not just code. As a matter of fact, machine learning models are mostly data, and they're dependent on data. And so if you're only managing the code aspect of the model, you're missing a lot. We have these issues of models that just their performance can change over time. This idea of model drift, where we have to measure their accuracy and their performance. And just because a model may work today does not necessarily mean it'll work for you tomorrow in a different situation. We also have the idea that data itself, or data themselves, are changing over time. And when data changes, that can result in different the models may all of a sudden no longer be applicable. There may be maybe now you're applying the model to a much broader set of use cases. And we have all these other issues that we have to deal with around governance and discovery and other aspects of dealing with the models as they are in operations.
Exactly, because as Ron said, data is at the heart of AI. And so if you have data that can constantly be changing, you can constantly be getting new data. So you need to figure out ways to manage that data and take in and digest that new data as well.
Yep. So we've been talking about MLOps. We published a report not too long ago on this concept of MLOps in our MLOps 2020 report.
Right. And so the idea of MLOps is fairly new. And that's why we wanted to have a report on it, because we thought that, it was very important for the market to start understanding and talking about machine learning operations and what exactly it is. So machine learning model operationalization management, that's normally referred to as MLOps, which is a lot easier to say. And it's focused basically on the life cycle of the model development and usage, and then in particular, different aspects of it. So as we said, some of the core aspects include that model discovery, model governance, versioning as well. You don't create a model and then put it out there and never touch it again. It's constantly being iterated, retrained, and because of that, you'll have different versions. Well, how do you manage those versions? Also, model monitoring and management, and then model security as well. That's a really big aspect that's coming into play with this.
Yeah, and this idea of model security, for example, is we have to protect these models, especially if they're being shared. So if we have a model, let's say a facial recognition model that we built that can detect employees and allow those employees, let's say, into your building. Let's say you've used the facial recognition, you've connected it to some sort of really highly critical task, right? Maybe you're using it to verify identity for some purchase. Maybe you're even using it for purchase. There are people who have created facial recognition systems where your face is your credit card, basically. Well, if somebody can go in and tamper with that model and make it such that, one person's face is recognized as somebody else's face, it would be nice if I could walk up to a camera and it thinks that I'm, say, Bill Gates or Elon Musk, and, next thing I know, I'm charging somebody else's credit card. But that's clearly not what you want to hear, because what you want models that are not going to be tampered with and not basically dealt with in that way. So we got to protect these models. We have to protect these models. This idea also of monitoring and management, models that may work in one application may not be working in another application. Models that may have one high usage in one situation may not have another usage in another situation. So this is part of the landscape of managing operationally the models as they're being put into use.
Right. And so We also thought it was important to talk about this because, as we said, that this is a nascent market. MLOps is still fairly nascent, but in 2020 we had predicted early at the end of 2019 that this was going to be something that was focused on in 2020, and so far we're seeing that. So, with this, where are these people and these companies, and where is all of this coming from? So we put together this chart to help visually represent where there's different, market incumbents that are coming into play. And so it's from 4 different aspects. It's from traditional DevOps vendors, management vendors, ML platform vendors, and then these full stack AI vendors. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into each of that.
Yeah, because this whole space of MLOps is so new. You have different kinds of companies, vendors, if you will, coming into this market from their own perspective. We just mentioned that there's this DevOps has been around for well over a decade, and we have a bunch of DevOps companies who are saying, oh, we have great technology, let's apply this to machine learning models. Of course, as we mentioned, you can't treat all machine learning models just as code to be deployed, because once it's deployed doesn't mean it works. You have to manage it over time. Then you have these management vendors, traditional, IT management companies that have been managing, keep an eye on monitoring and have dashboards and BI tools and that sort of stuff. They're looking at models as just another thing for them to manage as well. And that is certainly highly powerful, but they need to also add the development lifecycle and versioning to those capabilities. Likewise, we have these full stack AI vendors. I'll produce the whole thing, soup to nuts, right? From the infrastructure to build and train models to the actual models themselves, maybe pre-built models, pre-trained models, specific applications. These are what's called the full stack, right? The whole thing. But they also are offering increasingly this ability to manage and retrain models and do the security and governance. So there's a bunch of vendors coming into from that space. And then, of course, you have the traditional machine learning platform vendors. So these are going to be your machine learning as a service folks in the cloud, and folks are the traditional, machine learning development toolkits themselves. They're all coming into the space. It's a very popular market right now, and we expect it to be much, much hotter even in the near future.
Exactly, because some of these just see it as a natural extension of their existing ecosystem. With full stack AI vendors, for example, they also see that just as another component that they're working on, but it's typically in conjunction and not sold separately from their full stack offering.
Right. So a couple of key findings, because we see this as being a really hot market. We'll provide a link to the report in the replay notes as well. We see that this market's growing from a pretty nascent market. This past year, maybe 350 million total was spent on solutions in the space, but it's going to be well over a $4 billion market. I mean, clearly, as companies become more and more dependent on these models are being used in real life production situations. Companies have already iterated on their model, maybe 10, 20, 30 versions.
Right.
Consume third-party models. Obviously, in machine learning operations, MLOps becomes much, much more important than it used to be when you had one model and your team was building and iterating themselves. You can always ask the other people in your team, how's this model doing? And they'll tell you. Well, it's not going to be as easy in the future when you have all these models. So it's becoming a very vigorous, really hot market in general.
And also, as we showed in the last slide, we're expecting vigorous growth in this market and in this sector. And there'll be substantial new entrants and new companies coming in from the 4 different aspects that we discussed. And so we think that this is going to grow quite rapidly.
Yep. So, this has basically been our sort of predictions so far of kind of where things are going. We obviously, the other big thing we want to note here, I was just going to shift to the Modzy section just about here, is that we see that the markets, keep hitting the wrong button. We see that the markets are shifting from a development perspective, if you want to think of it that way, like the folks who are, the main considerations are developing models. We're starting to see the market become much more interested and more responsive to the consumption side, especially models that you're not building yourself. So as we start to see this transition, this is something that you may be familiar with in the Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm idea, where we're moving from a market that's sort of the early adopters and the innovators. Early adopters and innovators love new technology. They'll adopt anything, which is great. Yeah. It's just that the bulk of the market are what we call the early adopters and the sort of like late stage adopters. They're waiting for the technology to be proven. And that the market is transitioning when you're moving from a production-centric economy to a consumption, because if there's not enough choice out there, everybody else is just going to wait for there to be choice. But the fact that we're starting to see demand now for MLOps means that the general economy, people who may not have been building models for a decade, now are starting to be interested in using AI across the 7 patterns of AI. You know, that's the conversational apps and the recognition apps, the predictive analytics apps and the patterns and anomalies apps, the ones that are focused on hyper-personalization and autonomous systems and goal-driven systems. All of those things need models, and if you can find those models maybe built by someone else or by another team and use them, then it makes your thing work. So we're seeing broad adoption across all those categories.
Right. And in our report, we covered many companies who are working on MLOps tools for organizations and governments alike. And one of the companies that we covered was Modzy. So now we'll turn this over to Josh to explain more about what Modzy is and share how a solution like Modzy can help with issues around speed, scale, security, and the growing emergence of shadow AI. He'll also demo how Modzy works so that you can get a more hands-on view of the technology rather than him just explaining it to you. So welcome, Josh.
I appreciate it. I'm going to assume control. Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for teeing up such an important topic and an opportunity for me to introduce or reintroduce Modzy to those listening today. I think after years of working to solve some of the toughest challenges with developing and operationalizing AI, we started to recognize a pattern forming in the market and a need for a new approach to getting artificial intelligence out of the lab and into production, so that organizations could achieve that mission outcome that AI purports to have. But one of the things that we learned, that in the lab there are clearly defined and unchanging problem sets, along with cloud and HPC enabled or high performance computing enabled technology environments, as well as pervasive high speed networking capabilities. But for those experienced and AI practitioners out there, the real world presents dynamic problem sets, and as well as rigid software architectures and inconsistent and sometimes constrained IT environments and networking, along with some of the points, Ron, that you were talking about around data challenges and data drift. As we continue to look at and explore this marketplace of what those inhibitors might be, we also started to look and organize around 6 different types of personas. The first one, the data scientist on this slide, typically lacks the time and sometimes the expertise to deploy machine learning models into production at scale. And for some data scientists out there, getting into the trade, go off and use publicly sourced models that have been unverified as the basis for their design, and then may even be using the wrong AI techniques for their use cases. We're finding this out. Software engineers are tasked with building pretty amazing enterprise applications powered by AI, or being asked to do that, but sometimes rarely have the expertise in machine learning. And even more specifically, when you look at some of the non-functional requirements or the abilities of systems engineering, such as transparency, at an organizational level, to be able to deploy AI and understand the risks and opportunities there. Critical persona in this endeavor was really the end user. There's a highly skeptical user base in the real world that have trouble trusting AI predictions, especially if they don't have a clear understanding of how models are trained, what training data was used, the ability to provide feedback to the model. They also have their existing tools and interfaces and applications that they already know well, and they may not have the time or energy to learn a new front-end user interface that we're starting to see come to bear in terms of the AI software industry. Program managers, they're getting pressure from both above, their bosses and the executives in the organization, to deploy artificial intelligence, and also from the employees that are already using it in their daily lives at the consumer level. They're also forced to stand up a new program every time AI is needed to accelerate another mission. And given some of the statistics from industry research, I think it's important to note that a significant majority of AI projects don't end up delivering. So, not that program managers are at the complete bottom of the fun curve, with a huge responsibility of shifting not only organizational cultures around artificial intelligence, but also equally important, managing expectations so that their users, their shareholders, their stakeholders, and their leaders don't get disenfranchised around artificial intelligence when something goes wrong. And then, wrapping up with the C-suite, the information security officers, I think, they have to defend against entirely new cyber attack surface these days with artificial intelligence due to the persistent adversarial threat. And some AI vendors may not have the robust security mechanisms to protect from these types of attacks that are required for enterprise deployment so that you're not ending up on the front page of the newspaper. And then your other C-suite leaders, without a lack of bird eye view of how AI is being used across the enterprise or how to comply with requests and demands from auditors and those industries that are highly regulated, there's a potential risk there that occurs around governance, risk, and compliance. And this could also mean a missed opportunity. Significant duplication of effort is something that we've also seen across the market and industry. And additional risks due to a term that you phrased, Ron, shadow AI, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So these inhibitors really led us to the design and development of an enterprise AI platform that can help organizations accelerate their AI adoption, along with a marketplace of pre-trained AI models that have been built by both Modzy, but also from some other leading AI companies that span a number of different industry use cases and AI techniques. You can think of the platform like the analogy here, the Apple iOS, providing all of the capabilities and services that you would expect of a platform to run AI at enterprise scale, as well as a marketplace like the App Store supplied with really cool models that are ready to use. So for the sophisticated organization that may already have AI models, the Modzy platform really can provide you the tools and the management capabilities to deploy your models with speed and security. And for the organizations that are just getting started, the platform, along with the existing models, can provide you an immediate jump on adopting AI into your mission workflows. So Modzy, we believe, is the solution missing in machine learning ops today. We believe that Modzy offers choice, speed and scale, security. Choice really as an open architecture software product. You can choose what models you want from any vendor in the marketplace and how much you want to use them. Choice also includes the ability to deploy Modzy in the cloud, on-premise, or in any air-gapped environments, or at the tactical edge. We also, with a few lines of codes, Modzy allows data scientists and software engineers to do what they do best, faster than ever before. This includes hands-free AI model deployment for data scientists that I'm going to show here in a little bit, plus APIs and SDKs for developers, and scaling tools that can deploy to any infrastructure because we're built on Kubernetes. It also provides security. As I stated earlier, as an enterprise platform, there's some expectation of security built around Modzy. All assets are protected with hardened application security and enterprise access management, but we're also hardening Modzy to meet the most stringent controls associated with organizations like FISMA and standards coming out of NIST and FedRAMP. And then what I'm really excited to talk a little bit about is also some of the features that we provide and offer through our platform as well. Some early stage explainability capabilities that are available to the models that end up being 5 times better than current approaches in the market today, and ensure that transparency and explainability into the outcomes and predictions made by the models, as well as adversarial defense techniques that detect data poisoning, whether it's during training or at inference, as well as efforts to tamper with models. So we're able to provide insight into whether or not a model has been manipulated. And then also, I think we talked about this before with respect to the trust associated from the end user community and the data scientists that may be hesitant to use a pre-trained model. We've got model retraining capabilities that allow data scientists to tailor Modzy's cutting edge models to work with your own organization's data. So these are some pretty impressive capabilities and feature sets that the Modzy platform provides. And then lastly, we talked about the management and governance of models, logging and auditing so that you can keep track of who's using your AI across your organization and how it's being used, along with the model management capabilities that exist. So just to talk a little bit more about model management. There's a lot of opportunity with respect to understanding how to scale the infrastructure that you have. In that previous slide, we showed that Modzy sits on top of an organization's infrastructure, and we provide the capabilities and the tools to allow you to scale that infrastructure, whatever the constrained infrastructure is, up to maximum processing speed, as well as fully utilize the infrastructure you have. So providing reports and capabilities to your administrators, the end users that are using the different models in your marketplace, or the models that you've uploaded to the marketplace, to understand which models are used, which models aren't being used, so that you can perform the necessary audits and scanning of your enterprise in terms to understand how AI is being used today. Now, achieving the promise of AI is so much more than just the training of the next algorithm. It's about managing the data, optimizing your computing resources, cyber hardening the infrastructure, and much more. Modzy accelerates the machine learning ops process for organizations so that they can quickly and easily access, evaluate, deploy, embed, and manage the best AI models at scale. So users can really upload their own models for management and governance processes to occur and decisions to be made. Modzy is not a training platform, but it does integrate with many of the open source tools already used by developers. And we found that this is critically important because most data scientists and software engineers have their favorite set of tools that they like to use to build their models and build their applications. So we didn't want to inject Modzy into that value chain. And it's also a very saturated market, and there's a lot of open source capabilities that exist there today. So we've really focused in on the key elements of the MLOps process that have been the hardest to operationalize. Again, Modzy's API and SDK provides the extensibility to run and integrate Modzy with your applications with only a few lines of code, and allows your data scientists, again, to write AI applications and models in their favorite languages, such as Java, Python, JavaScript, etc. So we've created a lot of documentation around our API and SDK that I'll be able to show you links to as well, that folks on the phone that haven't explored Modzy yet can all find available at demo.modzy.com. And wanted to show a quick snapshot of a Jupyter notebook that we have that's leveraging Modzy. I think this notebook demonstrates the simplicity of using Modzy to run sophisticated AI models and even string together different models together. In this particular notebook example and screenshot, we have strung together a language identification model with a translation model, named entity recognition, and sentiment analysis model to be able to start looking at streaming data off of social feeds. So pretty impressive capability to be able to string these models together to create an entire workflow to support whatever your mission needs are. So in summary, Modzy, before we get into the demo, provides the choice, the speed and scale and security needed for an enterprise AI platform. It enables machine learning ops, and it provides really impressive features around adversarial defense and explainability and retraining, so that organizations, sophisticated or less mature, can really accelerate the AI adoption in their organizations. And now I'm going to switch over to the demo. Okay, so what I'm going to demonstrate real quickly is one of the features that I talked about. We're trying to make it super easy for data scientists to upload their models into Modzy, and also to support and embed and enable governance within an organization to be able to understand what models are being developed and designed and used in production. So this is one of the capabilities that we're calling model deployment and a launch pad that allows those users to actually upload their models. And I'll walk people through this. So with respect to this particular capability, I'm going to actually show how we create a model or upload a model into Modzy. And the first model that I'm going to show or demonstrate is an overhead building detection model that I've created. And we talked about the importance of versioning. Modzy supports extensive versioning capabilities. It allows you to manage and control the number of versions that you have in your production environment. This particular version of the model that I'm running is a .13 version. And so just like TurboTax, it's going to walk me through step-by-step process to actually deploy the model. Now, in this particular step, it's important to understand, I'm going to actually import a model from a Docker registry. Can you guys see my screen right now? It has a overhead building detection model.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the biography of the model, and I'll quickly go through it again. We cover the various performance metrics, the technical details associated with the model itself, to really answer some of those questions and build that trust of that end user community. Knowing what training data was used and what validation data was also used, as well as being able to provide the API code that's necessary for doing those integrations that we talked about before. And then, of course, the version history, also equally important. Part of the marketplace and part of what you can see in demo.modzy.com is, for every model in there, we've got examples of what the outputs are going to be associated with the models. So here you can see 3 different examples from 3 different imagery sources, actually 4 examples, sorry, and what this particular model output is going to look like for the end user. So again, we have a huge marketplace and a growing number of models, both from Modzy as well as partner companies that are contributing their latest and bleeding edge AI models into the marketplace. We also provide an extensive set of user documentation around the API, sample integrations, as well as information about the Modzy SDK, etc. And then I just finally want to walk through the administration side of this particular platform. I think it's really important to note that, we talked about security and role-based access controls. You can see that my user key and my details are here and what roles I'm assigned. We have the ability to establish new roles for different organizations if it makes sense. And that's critical because as an account administrator, or even, for instance, with this particular priority key, we've built in features that allow you to manage, as an administrator, to manage the queuing and the priority of the queues of models that are run given your infrastructure environment, as well as the keys. And you can see all the different keys that have been assigned to me, those that are pending, and then those are active. Also, again, user roles, API key management. You can see the different system account keys. You can actually activate and deactivate or approve and decline the different keys for the different models that are available to different people. As you can see, a number of people actively using Modzy right now in this particular instance. And also importantly, the ability to look at job history. We do an extensive amount of logging and provide auditing and dashboarding capabilities associated with job history for this particular one. Depending on what the date range is, we can see what the different jobs are, as well as go into the job details, see which jobs completed with errors, so that as an administrator, you can go back and look at that. If you select different jobs, you have the ability to download them or export them to whatever SIM capability you have in your organization. And you can take a look at some of the job details associated with each of the history, jobs in the history. So when was it run? How long did it take? What model was used? What version was used? What was the completion status? So a lot of different capabilities associated with what the Modzy platform is able to provide, including that Launchpad capability that makes it really easy for organizations to upload their models and deploy them into production. So with that, I want to take time. I think Ron and Kathleen answer some questions that we might have.
All right, excellent job. So you kind of saw how the ops interface looks, some of the ideas there. So I know we have a couple of questions that we've queued up, and also I think, and keep queuing up your questions here. So I'm going to put up our little thank you slide here, but go ahead.
Get
maybe
us started.
Kathleen,
Sure.
Skip some.
So, Josh, this question is for you. Can you share with us some of the challenges that you've seen companies and government agencies face as they begin to use machine learning models in production?
Certainly. I think, we talked about a bit about this at the beginning when we were talking about the different personas. In the real world, the environment is very different than in a development sandbox or in a lab environment where you have the pristine conditions established, you have the right technology, you know how to configure and manage that technology. But when you get into the real world and you have real data coming into your models, I think that's where you start to see the big difference. And rigid software architectures and inconsistent and constrained IT environments and networking capabilities really start to one, affect the performance of the models, but also aren't necessarily, these types of scenarios and conditions aren't necessarily considered at the design onset of when the models are being developed or designed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the biggest thing is like we're starting to see people just starting to think about the questions that they need to ask. They're not even aware of what they need to know. It's sort of like there's a lack of
and
knowledge
education. I think that needs to be done in the market in general, kind of around this.
I think what we're finding is that we talked about the difference between sophisticated and those organizations and those that are starting to create this tradecraft inside their organization. There's still a learning curve that exists in the market, not only around what AI can and can't do, but how to go about operationalizing it. And we're really trying to position Modzy as a way to accelerate that conversation and that education, but also the capability to achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I think that sometimes people, regularly say to us, they're like, well, yeah, I have this problem that I want AI to solve, but it's kind of a boring use case, like, document classification. And we're like, wow, that's a great use case. They want it to be some really big, grandiose thing. And we always say at Cognilytica, start small, think big, iterate often. So I think, what is AI and what isn't, what can it do, what can it do? Those are still kind of fundamental questions that I think many people are still asking in the market. So that's nice you bring that up. Following up with that, why is now the right time to start thinking for a lot of these organizations and government agencies? Why is now the right time to start thinking about managing AI at an enterprise scale?
I think it's a really good question, Kathleen. I think that when I think about different organizations, where we are in terms of the maturity curve of this technology and the early stage research still that needs to take place, I think it's important for organizations to start seeing their AI investments pay off, or for the new organization that's just starting out to set themselves up for longer term success. And this requires investing in not only people, but also the tools and technologies that can enable that success, and have things like governance conversations and understand what the organizational values are and how they're applied to their implication and application of machine learning technologies within their organization. I think different topics like that around security that we talked about, privacy, and just some of the more technical capabilities that don't box developers in or allow flexibility. I think those are important topics right now.
Yeah, that's good. And then this is kind of a question for the group. So, Ron and I can chime in as well. But because we get asked this a lot, so it would be nice to get your perspective as well. How do you see AI adoption maturing over the next few years in the government? And why is it so important that agencies look at areas related to MLOps now?
The government's pretty vast, and there are a number of organizations that are already using AI today. A language translation algorithm might be commoditized in one government agency, but could really improve the mission effectiveness of another that is less mature in terms of this particular technology. I think, over the course of time, you're going to start seeing some organizations and large organizations putting in place, like I said, those enabling technologies or capabilities that will support and provide the infrastructure, the hardware, the compute, the data. I think is also critically important for organizations to really put themselves on that maturity scale.
Yeah, I think so. And we're seeing very interesting adoption as well in the government. I mean, clearly we have this unique situation where the government governments and agencies and organizations of all types, not even governments, banks and mortgage companies, they all have to get their business done, but we have this situation where we have remote workforces and we have changes to business practices. We have these huge shocks to supply chains. We have dramatic changes to the way business operations are run. We have, supply, we have everything from education and training and workforce, and all that stuff is changing. And interestingly enough, we've seen a lot of commentary about this. This is actually increasing the desire to use more intelligent systems, automation systems, operation systems of all sorts. And as a result, people who may have been wary about, let's say, some sort of tool that may have allowed them to do something more autonomously, now they're realizing that there's some benefit to doing that, whether it's in any part of the government operations or any part of industry activity as well. So we're starting to see greater interest in that, and because of that, the majority, as we say, the early majority of the people have been on the sideline. They don't have huge data science teams, and they don't have the resources to build models from scratch. They're going to want to find as many shortcuts, if you will, to getting there with the same level of quality as everybody else, and that means using and consuming models. So I think even now this is going to really accelerate.
I think you're right, Ron. I think, in terms of the different communities, one of the personas that we didn't talk about at the beginning is really the contracting and acquisition organizations. I think as to your point, as different organizations find their adoption rates differently and look to use pre-trained models potentially in their workflows, figuring out and making it easy for contracting officials and acquisition officials to understand what they're getting, and not constraining the use or consumption of that capability, and making it really simple to understand what those metrics are that they're going to have to follow for using these capabilities is critically important as well.
Absolutely. So we do have a question from the audience here. I know we got plenty more queued up. But I'm going to interpret this for MLOps, because there's plenty of use cases in general for AI in the Fed space. So the real question is for MLOps in the Fed space. I know you have lots of examples, especially lots of different models. So to what extent can you talk about sort of the adoption of this MLOps approach in the federal space, and kind of who you're seeing sort of these early adopters?
I think that I think people are still trying to figure out what MLOps is and how it applies to their organizations. So reports like the one that you guys produce are certainly helping in that arena. I think, there are still organizations out there that are rubbing sticks together to make fire, right? And understanding and putting in place those guardrails and those enabling capabilities, like I talked about, are going to be critical to really accelerating that adoption curve. I think with respect to MLOps and how it's being deployed, I think we're starting to see more requests and requirements for that capability right now. I know that, different software vendors and organizations are providing that capability in terms of the training and development side. But the more that artificial intelligence starts making its way into the different workflows, I think the model management and the model operations is going to be equally more important, just given the different risks associated with this technology. So, that's kind of where I see it right now in terms of the federal space. I think, we're going to see more and more of it, really.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that we are going to start seeing more and more of that as well. So thanks for answering that question. It looks like we have another question from the audience as well. It's from Robert. So how much this tool is different than existing open source MLOps? So how is this different from tools like Kubeflow or MLflow?
Yeah, I think a lot of the capabilities that exist in the open market today that are focused or trying to focus on not only the development and training side of machine learning, but starting to tap dance into the model operations and deployment side. I think there are differences in the effect of some of the adversarial capabilities, the explainability capabilities, and the retraining capabilities that Modzy provides. I think, we have been intentional in terms of building in the robust security associated with machine learning and the actual operational performance features and the ability to actually manage and control who uses AI across your organization and be able to have the auditing capability. I think there's some significant differences. And it also, we work and integrate with all those open source capabilities too, through our API and SDK. So I think there's a place there to create that end-to-end without a single capability and software package.
Yeah, it's actually something we cover in the report. We talk about the growth of these open source MLOps tools. There's a few. There's a few.
Lot,
there's
yeah.
Obviously the there's Netflix kind of pushed out theirs. That was the ML Flow, and then the Kubeflow, then the Apache project, and there's sort of like two different ways of thinking about it. It's like just like everything with the computing. It's like, what's your perspective on life? It's like, do you want to go with Kafka or do you want to? There's like all this sort of stuff. You have to think about your perspective on event-driven architecture, but for ML ops, the perspective is: are you thinking about it from the perspective of the producer of the model? Like, this is your model, right? Or your team's models. And are you sort of thinking about the life cycle from the production of the producer, which is, how is your model performing? Thinking about it in terms of model iteration, doing things like model drift and that sort of stuff. But you're thinking about it because this is sort of like your model, right? And you're like, okay, how, you're the model owner, right? Think of it this way. The other perspective is as the model consumer, which is like, okay, I'm building a solution, I'm building an app, and I'm depending on a model which I have no control, I have very little control over, perhaps. But you're in control of the data, so you are you have control over the operational data. It's your data, but you're using the third-party model. Well, you're dependent on that model, right? So you need to know same thing, model versioning. You need to model. You're concerned about model drift as well because you want to know is it drifting against your data. Whereas other person's like, is my model drifting against somebody else's data? And so when you think about it that way, the tools kind of have different tooling perspectives, I guess, if you want to think about it. They have different, it's like there's different people, they're built with different people in mind. One's built for the development team, one's built for sort of the consumption team. And as a result, you'll just find different things. That doesn't mean that you could make one tool do something that another tool is doing. It's just that it's sometimes you're sort of shoehorning a tool to do something that's not doing. And that's definitely the case with ML Flow in particular, that you're sort of think that's from the production perspective. We talk about this quite a bit. There's actually a follow-up question also from,
I think that's right. I see the follow-up question about the types of resources that are and expertise required to use Modzy. Could a software developer with zero experience in machine learning use it? I think, listen, that is one of the personas that we absolutely designed Modzy for, is for that software engineer that doesn't have the machine learning experience. We've produced a significant amount of documentation around the API and the SDK, and with a single line of code, for instance, and that Jupyter notebook, you're able to start using and operating in Modzy right away. So we're providing those tools. We're providing the code snippets to be able to use and integrate Modzy into various front end COTS applications or custom applications. So yeah, I think that's one of the key features that we've built into Modzy.
Yeah, excellent questions, and I think this is part of like the learning. When you sort of like when you learn something new, sometimes like your brain gets all like twisted, you get really confused. You're like, you're not sure how to think about it, and then you get it. Then you're like, oh, all of a sudden, then you kind of know what kinds of questions you should be asking because you understand sort of the way it's being used. So these are great questions. I think we have one. We're looking at the time here. We have time for another question or two. We from the audience. I know we have one more here. We're getting close to the end of time. But let me ask this question. And let's think about retraining, because we talked about it a couple times. People know about training, right? Which is getting the model to learn from experience, and you're building this model from especially supervised learning, right? But the question is, how should organizations be thinking about retraining? Which is over time getting this model to retrain on new data or existing data or data where the model is drifting, or maybe you're expanding the use of the model. How should they be thinking about this as part of their overall strategy?
Yeah, certainly. like I said, a pre-trained model may not work for every organization, but the underlying intent and architecture may. And if we can provide the capability to retrain that model on an organization-specific data set, I think we're moving the ball forward pretty aggressively there. I also think that it's important and incumbent on platforms like Modzy, and these are features that you know are included in the platform, the ability to monitor performance at inference and understand not only from an infrastructure perspective how the infrastructure is being used, but also the performance of the models being used, so that you can inform that particular retraining exercise. I also think, you know, one of the things that we're looking at from a Modzy applied research perspective is the human in the loop training components and the type of feedback that an end user can provide to a model at inference time to be able to improve upon that model and the predictions that model makes. I think these are all different dimensions that need to be considered, and we're excited that Modzy is able to provide these type of features and capabilities.
Yeah, thank you. This is great questions. So, you know, as mentioned, you know, as you're sort of consuming and thinking about the topic of this webinar, we encourage you to do so. There'll be lots of follow-up here. We have obviously the slides, which are available for download. And also we have this replay. So definitely encourage you to replay this many times if you want to sort of
to kind of let it all sink in. As Ron said, you know, sometimes it may take more than once to hear it, especially if this is your first time.
Yeah. And also we have the report, which we will have some more and more details to share with you about getting access to this report. That's available on the site. We'll definitely link to it on the replay and in other places.
I just to add, I welcome anybody to go to modzy.com and reach out and you know, those wanting more information, we're happy to provide it. We're trying to make as much information available on our website and in the demo site. So like I said, a wealth of documentation that exists about Modzy Platform and the API, but also happy to do, you know, demonstrations for your different organizations. I realize that today we had a bit of a technical hiccup there, but happy to provide more insight into the platform and the administrative aspects of Modzy.
Yeah, great. And we definitely, you know, people in the audience, we definitely encourage you to take advantage of that and learn more about it. I'm sure that, you know, you have additional questions after we just did a very small demo of the platform, but there's a lot of cool things to it. So please reach out to Josh and the Modzy team. And thank you so much, Josh, for joining us on this webinar today. And thank you for all of the attendees for coming.
Absolutely. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you very much. Stay safe, healthy, and dry. Yes. We will catch you all.
Bye, everybody.